Hello and welcome to Beyond GDP, the Social Progress Podcast. I'm Michael Green, CEO of the Social Progress Imperative, and in this podcast we are having conversations with people who are thinking about a different way of building our economies and societies, building economies and societies that are fit for people and planet. Now, one thing that always astonishes me about talking about Beyond GDP is that people somehow think that GDP economic numbers were handed down from God on tablets of stone. When of course we know that GDP was a creation of less than 100 years ago. It's a statistical tool that was created to help us manage our society. And so if we wanted to think about building better societies, better economies, we have to think differently about how we measure so we can manage better. Now, the first person who said that was actually the creator of GDP, Simon Kuznets, in his groundbreaking report of 1934, that first released the US national income statistics. So Beyond GDP has been a long game since the beginning, and it's also a team effort. So as part of this series, we love to talk to other people who have been thinking and working in the Beyond GDP space. And today, I think I wouldn't be wrong in saying I'm talking to a legend. Riane Eisler is an author whose books are in countless languages, countless reprints, her most famous of which is The Chalice and the Blade. And she's written across a whole range of subjects. She is a very broad thinker across disciplines. So, Riane, I'm really grateful. Thank you very much for joining us today. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, I'm very happy to be with you. And I love what you do. I love the social progress index that you have created, but we need to go further.
Let's get into that. Why don't we come into one of your books that wrote mostly about economic systems, the real wealth of nations. What were you saying about what is the real wealth of nations as you see it?
Well, I think we all know that the real wealth of nations consists of people and of our natural habitat. Unfortunately, we've inherited economic systems theories from Smith, from Marx, post-capitalism and socialism, that while they challenge what I call some traditions of domination, perpetuate. Well, look, let me talk about this because it is a new paradigm. First of all, I've introduced the Partnership-Domination social scale, which really comes out of decades of whole systems research and sees patterns. And I can give you some examples of societies that seem very, very different, but really aren't in very critical respects. They orient primarily to either the domination side or the partnership side. In terms of contemporary societies, we have the Taliban, a religious Eastern society, fundamentalist Iran, again, an Eastern religious society. But you also have on the left and in the West, Stalin's Soviet Union, and you certainly have Hitler's Nazi Germany. So here you have on the surface, in terms of the conventional categories, some are Eastern, some are religious, others are secular, some are Southern, some are Northern, but they share the configuration, and it is a configuration that we're beginning to be conscious of. Neuroscience, for example, my last book came out with Oxford University Press, Nurturing Our Humanity, as you probably know, because you do your homework. And that draws a lot from neuroscience, which confirms the importance of both family and childhood and gender, which are marginalized in our conventional categories. Both these formative influences on our life. We can't do that anymore. We have to look at the whole picture. And looking at the whole picture, the first books that came out of this whole systems analysis, and there was a lot in my life that led up to this. Certainly being a refugee child from the Holocaust with my parents, but also my first job was with the Systems Development Corporation, which was an offshoot of the Rand Corporation. So I learned about the concept of systems analysis very early in my life. My interest in prehistory as a refugee child, I grew up in the industrial slums of Havana. And I went to a private school because that was, education was a really very important thing. But anyway, if you look at Marx and Smith at our economic system, you see that they exclude from their economic map the three life-sustaining sectors: the natural economy, the volunteer community economy, and the household economy. For both Marx and Smith, as was the norm in their time, because they did challenge some traditions of domination, as I said. I mean, Smith challenged the so-called divinely ordained right of kings, this pyramid, right? This domination pyramid. And then Marx challenged, of course, the rule of in the so-called Gilded Age of the bourgeoisie, but they perpetuated a gendered system of values. Mother Earth, women were supposed to do the volunteer work, the wives of the affluent, and of course, the household economy. The norm in their time was that caring, which is coded feminine in all of the categories we've inherited, was to be, for people starting at birth, was to be done for free by a woman in a male-controlled household. Now, Marx and Smith both called that work just reproductive rather than productive. And this is our fundamental economic problem. If you exclude the three life-sustaining sectors, which was really the norm, if you will. I mean, the only persons who counted were men, and yes, gender has a lot to do with this, because caring is coded feminine. So, to make a long story short, what I have been advocating for is a caring economics of partnerism. And we can't just keep on putting band-aids on the old system. We really have to change these categories, which make no sense, but are still taught in our business schools and our economic schools. And there's one thing that I really like about your work, not enough from my perspective, but you were the first one to really include some of the caring work.
Well, I think when we talk about the caring economy as such, or the caring contribution, we always have to acknowledge that Simon Kuznets was, of course, that was the reason he actually broke with GDP, because he always said that household work should be part of the calculations, and that was one of the problems. So at least he got sort of one piece of that right in his critique. Yeah, I think you talked about some of the domination societies. It'd be interesting to hear a bit about what are examples of partnership societies?
All right. Well, my first book, as I said, drawing from this research, drew from a much larger database, the whole of humanity, both the female and male forms, which are the two forms in our species, right? And everybody in between. But also it drew from the whole of our history, including what we call prehistory, before any deciphered. And I stress that. Written records. And what I discovered is what's being verified. I mean, the latest was some Chinese archaeologists, for example, discovered, and I don't know if you know this, it was, of all places, I think it was the Economists even. I mean, they discovered a matrilineal society that lasted for millennia, that was more peaceful. Çatalhöyük is beginning slowly to get into our history books. No, civilization did not start in Sumer. It started much earlier when societies oriented more to, remember, it's a continuum. Partnership, domination, more to the partnership side. But contemporary societies, Ireland, for example, has rapidly moved to the partnership side. The Nordic nations, and they're not socialist. This is a canard. This is really simply not true. They have a very healthy market economy precisely because they have caring policies. Universal health care, child care that is accessible, government supported, and highly paid, parental leave, generous parental leave for both fathers and mothers. And in those kinds of families where there is both a father and a mother, if the father doesn't take it, nobody gets it because they tried it. And it just, because fathers still get, there is a gender gap in pay. But at least today, women are in the workforce, women are in leadership positions. And it's not coincidental that in those societies that have moved towards the partnership side, you have more women. And it's not because women are better than men, but it's that socialization of men. Well, men don't have it so well, so good in domination systems. They have to give nothing less than their lives because some guy on top, like a Putin, wants more real estate, but they get us up. They get to be kings of the castle of their homes, ruling it over women and children. And of course, women learn to manipulate, as all powerless people do, and it's a mess.
Riane, if, 5 or 10 years ago, if we had this conversation, we might have been saying, well, things are broadly moving in the right direction. How can we accelerate progress, etc.? Today, it looks like the world's going in the opposite direction, whether it's from sort of the rise of the authoritarian populist macho men, toxic masculinity being in fashion. I mean, as you look at the world now, don't you feel a bit sort of despairing?
Well, I look at it from a perspective that is a systems perspective. And I think that we're certainly in the midst of a regression to domination. And it includes family. I mean, they look at what's happening even in the United States. Emphasis on controlling your children, even controlling what they're exposed to, book burning. I mean, the whole 9 yards. Gender, it's so funny. Denial of gender fluidity. What there always have been gay, lesbian, transgender people. I mean, what else is new? But no. And yes, ranking, the SOP. Men over women. And what do children learn? We just had a summit, by the way, called Peace Begins at Home. Because in a domination household where you have this model of our species, children learn to equate difference, beginning with the fundamental difference between female and male, with either superiority or inferiority, dominating or being dominated, being served or serving, and they learn to equate, as you mentioned, masculinity with control, with violence. And the United Nations tells us that 2/3 of all children worldwide live in unsafe homes where they're physically punished. So it's the normalization of violence, isn't it? There's so much to unpack here. But the point of it is, I took a long time in getting to it, that the regression to domination is actually a reaction to movement after movement, challenging the same thing, which is unfortunately still invisible: domination. I mean, think of the Enlightenment challenging the so-called divinely ordained right of kings to rule their subjects. Then you have the feminist movement challenging again the so-called divinely ordained right of men to rule over women. Then you have the abolitionists, the civil rights, the Black Lives Matter movement challenging again the divinely ordained right of a, quote, superior race to rule over inferior ones. The peace movement challenging violence, which is, how else? Domination systems are trauma factories, and that we're hearing a lot about trauma, by the way, is very interesting because it starts in families, continues into economics, as a matter of fact. Poverty is traumatizing. Mm-hmm. And we know this, but the environmental movement, what does it challenge? The dominion, right? Over everything, over nature, our Mother Earth. So I look at it that you see still the movement toward partnership, but you also see a terrific regression, mostly by very traumatized people.
So almost like there's a counter revolution going on towards domination to resist the rise of partnership. So how do we respond to that? What's the right way to respond to that challenge?
I think that our response has to be not in-group versus out-group, not blaming and shaming, but really presenting a better alternative. Because most of us don't know. We get information thrown at us in so many distinct little fragments. And my work is about connecting the dots. And that's really what the Partnership-Domination scale is about. As I said, you can have leftist regimes like Stalin's former Soviet Union, very top-down in every respect. And yes, violence and fear. But you can also have rightists. It isn't that they're rightists, it's that they're domination-oriented. They see a pyramid. I see the alternative of partnership because I see that all of these movements have challenged this. And it's not coincidental that the challenge has come during a period of massive disequilibrium as the Industrial Revolution went into high gear. You know my work somewhat. I draw heavily from some of the new theoretical approaches about complex living systems, and societies are complex living systems. A chaos theory, nonlinear dynamics, self-organization theory. And I've introduced what I call a new methodology, the study of relational dynamics, because the fundamental question is what kinds of relations does a particular social system support or inhibit? And the stories we've been told are very much, they're four cornerstones that we have to see. We have been trying to ameliorate all the suffering chronically caused by domination systems. The problem with only doing that is that it maintains the system. So the four cornerstones are, first of all, family and childhood. What children observe or experience affects nothing less than how our brains are structured. Neuroscience shows this, but unfortunately, so many of the stories pretend somehow that families spring up out of no place. Families, like other institutions, are embedded in a larger culture, okay? Gender has been marginalized as just a women's issue. Even though there's a very important men's movement, because you have to change both the socialization for masculinity and femininity. You can't just change the socialization for femininity without changing. And two of the speakers at our summit were actually leaders of the men's movement, Gary Barker of Equimundo and Jackson Katz, who, as you know, worked with football players, etc., military. We have to show through economics, working on new economic indicators that really give more value to caring and caregiving. Now, there have been lots of trends in that direction, but unfortunately, and we are traumatized too. When I say we, those who know that a better possibility is possible and who have worked for it. But the resistance to any change is really massive on the part of people from domination families. And that's why, peace begins at home, because it ripples out this normalization of violence. Studies show this. For example, my latest book, Nurturing Our Humanity, which, as I said, came out with Oxford University Press in 2019, shows this. But there are very few studies that look at it from a cultural perspective.
What worries me here, Riane, is that what we're seeing with some of the political cultural movements we're seeing now, they are creating a new cycle of violence, in a sense. It can be the violence of language that's part of our politics now. I mean, the ugliness with which politicians can speak about their opponents and people they don't like. It can be the ugliness of discourse, the ugly way people talk to each other. And if you respond to those patterns, then that cycle escalates. I mean, how do you break that cycle?
All right, story and language is the fourth cornerstone. We have to, number one, deconstruct and then reconstruct many of our stories. I mean, take the Odyssey, one of our projects, is both deconstructing the Odyssey. There are a lot of clues in the Odyssey of a time when women, the female half of humanity, the female form, had positions of power, but they're monsters. I mean, think about it. Charybdis, monster, the sirens, they eat men. I mean, what more do you want? Or they're just sex objects. And the Odyssey is really a messaging that it's the hero's journey, and the hero is a killer. But the hero gets his rulership still through a woman, through Penelope. I mean, that's very succinctly put, the deconstruction part. But now, how do we reconstruct this journey? How do we reconstruct it? It's a partnership journey now. It's a group journey. And you have caring men. You have gay people. You know, it's a very interesting thing that so many of our stories about, quote, human nature simply are false. And that's the first thing we have to challenge. There's a blockbuster film coming out. Nolan, the director, is coming out in July with a blockbuster of the Odyssey. And we're working on a short film, both deconstructing and reconstructing the Odyssey. I think that change in this time now, you're asking what the intervention is, to show that there has always been a better alternative, not to go back to any good old days, because these were not ideal societies, but they oriented more to partnership. We're kind of like building the airplane while we're flying it, I don't have, these, I mean, we want simple answers, tablets, as you say, cast in stone. I don't have that, but I know that the shift from the industrial to the post-industrial era is happening in a flash, much, much quicker than the shift from mainly being an agrarian, because we still have agriculture, obviously, to an industrialized society, which took centuries, really. And when it really accelerated, we got all of these movements, didn't we? Challenging the same thing, domination. I feel that those pushing us back have a very coherent domination frame. It includes family, it includes gender, certainly includes economics, like in the Gilded Age, you're seeing this horrible, really. And, the idealized times were not so good. And we have to tell the truth about them, about how people were being tarred and feathered. I mean, violence is not new. Fear and violence keeps the system of domination going. But our job is to show that there is a better alternative and really get people, Einstein said it. He said, you can't solve problems with the same consciousness, the same thinking that created them. So whether you call it domination and partnership, we need to see these patterns. We need to connect the dots. And some of the dots are huge, like gender, like family and childhood, which have been left out of the analysis. And it all takes me to the social wealth economic indicators that we, with a grant from the Kellogg Foundation of 300, which was a lot of money in those days, but it was an ad hoc attempt. But what we did was, there's something very interesting. We not only took a snapshot of what is, which is pretty dismal, and has been for a long time, really, these movements have somewhat moved towards partnership, but not enough, because we don't have that frame. And we need to have the frame. But the social wealth economic indicators really not, as I said, not only take a snapshot of what is, but also look at investments. And the United States, which 10 years ago when we did this study, and these indicators came out, and they're still on our website, which is centerforpartnership.org. And you can just put in social wealth economic indicators. We also look at what really happens when you don't invest in families. The United States of developed nations invests the least, has the highest infant mortality rate, the highest maternal mortality rate. This was 10 years ago, in the good old days, right? Has the highest child poverty rate. I mean, really, it's there. But you have to look at how much do we really put in, and that makes a difference. So I'm hoping that you will be interested in exploring this, having indicators that really, first of all, show the tremendous progress that women have made in a very short time. But it's progress for men as well. And look at all the men who are diapering babies, eating babies, doing the women's work, right? Of all ages. We're a flexible species, and we can change just like that.
It's always, people often can assume that the world can't change, and I think I always sort of go back to Galileo Galilei, and yet it moves. We do see that things can change even when they seem so unmovable. Riane, we're running out of time, but no one gets away from the Beyond GDP podcast without making a prediction. Anything you like, but give me a prediction.
Well, I think there will be a lot of suffering. And there is a lot of suffering right now because of this regression to domination. But I have confidence in the human thrust for not only surviving, but thriving. So I think that we will continue. And I see that now actually is the moment when people are open to new thinking. And that starts with language, because linguistic psychologists tell us that our language, well, if we don't have a word for something, we don't have a word for something, right? We can't express it. So I think that the contribution of the partnership-domination scale is fundamental. And the funny thing about it, and I can send you an article I did for a magazine called Compass, which is the official magazine of forecasters and the futurists. It shows that the people pushing us back have a domination frame, that they pay a lot of attention to these four cornerstones. And we must do the same. Instead of capitalism versus socialism, that's crazy. I mean, we need to go beyond those. I mean, they came out of the 1700s and the 1800s, and we're now in the 21st century post-industrial era. I mean, it's really time for new thinking.
One of the saddest things I find about modern academia is it's so pigeonholed and so siloed. And I think what you demonstrate is that by bringing together different disciplines, a broad perspective, the insight that you can really bring. So, Riane Eisler, thank you so much for being a guest. I feel we've only scratched the surface of your work, but it's been a great pleasure doing so. People who want to find out more, it's centerforpartnership.org. Have I got that right?
Yes.
Excellent. Great. Riane Eisler, thank you so much. Thank you all for watching and listening. If you like it, like and subscribe. If you want to see more about our data, look at the Social Progress website, socialprogress.org. And to find out more about Riane's work, centerforpartnership.org. Thank you all so much. Goodbye.
We believe in a world where everyone can reach their full potential. The social progress imperative is building that future. More inclusive and sustainable, one community at a time. Support our work. Donate today at socialprogress.org/donate now.